Hey Flosstube, it's Trisha, the left-handed stitcher. I am finally getting around to filming the video I've been promising for a while. I'm going to show you how I make my scroll rod covers that I use on my Millennium frames. Alright, so first I'll start with just a little bit of background. A while back I was watching a video, I think it was Stitching May, where she was showing a scroll rod grime guard that she had purchased during a trip and went to one of the LNSs along the way, I believe. That got the gears turning in my head on how would I make a scroll rod cover. So when I sat down and I sketched out my plan, it turns out that it is 90% just like the grime guard for your Q-snap tutorial. It uses a lot of the same steps and skills. So what I'm going to do is the parts that are the same as the grime guard tutorial, I'm going to use photographs and voiceovers. And then the stuff that's different is what I will video. Alright? Now this is what your fabric panel looks like before the elastic is added to it, and so it turns into a taco shape. Now it's got the same channels down the sides for the elastic, exact same as the grime guard, but the ends are different because I needed to finish them since they're going to be free. So what I did is I just did a simple 1/4 inch hem along both ends. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and show you how to make the fabric panel and then how to add the elastic to it. And after that I will go over how to measure for your fabric and how to measure for the elastic. Alright, so let's get to it. To make the fabric panels, I use my iron and ironing board to turn the short edges in 1/4 inch. Then I sew straight across to create those nice finished ends. Next, I create the channels along the long sides exactly the same way I did in my grime guard tutorial. Alright, so now I am going to demonstrate how I add the elastic to the fabric panel. What I do is I mark a 1 inch line from one end, and then I add the safety pin to that end, and then about 5-6 inches away from the other end I attach one of these guys. It's a little clippy thing. I found these at Walmart with the quilting stuff, but you could easily just use a safety pin pinned crosswise to do the same thing. What it's going to do is it's going to stop the fabric from going further than this point so that I have a free end to work with when I want to sew the ends together. So what I will do is I start on one side and I just feed it through. You want to make sure that your elastic stays flat, doesn't twist at any point during this procedure. So feeding it through. And when it gets to this end, because you have that hem right there, it's a little bit of a lip, I squeeze it to open up that channel, and it makes it a lot easier to get the safety pin through. Alright, so now at this point is where you're going to start going down the other side to make that taco shape. So what I do is I pull this way out so that I have a long lead and it's bunched up right up against that clamp right there. So then here is the end. Fold it like a taco. Bring your elastic around so that it will flow from one side to the other without twisting. So get it going and then just feed it through. Just keep on feeding. Normally I have music playing when I do this, but because I can't do that while I'm filming, you guys have to listen to me. Alright, so I am through the other side. I pull it way out. So now it's bunched really good down at that end. So now, let me adjust this side a little bit. I take the clamp off and I pull a little bit just to give myself a little bit more room to work with. Alright, so now what you do is this end, you want to join these together so that it flows from one side to another without twisting. So as it comes out from there, I take the safety pin off, and that 1 inch mark, I line it up, the one end with that 1 inch mark. And this is the overlap that I'm going to use to attach these two pieces together. When I made the first one, I just, held them together and I sewed across and I trimmed it down, but that still left a pretty good nub, that I didn't like. So I figured out if I overlap them by 1 inch, and I cheat, I use a little bit of my scrapbooking adhesive to kind of hold them together so that they don't shift when I'm sewing. Just a touch right in the center of that 1 inch part is all it takes. So get them lined up, and now we're gonna sew. What I'll do is I'll sew a line across towards this end, and then I'll sew another line across towards the other end. So let me do that now. I sew across, I go back over, I go across, and back again. And then pull that out, trim my threads, trim that guy, and now I have one side stitched down, so now I'm going to stitch the other side down. And of course, as I always do, I start with a scrap piece of fabric. And then get the elastic under there and sew across. and back and across and back. Here we go. Out we go. Trim the threads on both sides. Alright, so now I have 2 lines of stitching across. I'll just trim off that little nub about 1/8 of an inch away from the stitching, and this one as well. So now my elastic is nice and fixed together, the ends. I will take this guy, and I want this part to end up somewhere in the middle of one of the sides. So I'll hold this side in place, go down until I can open up the other side and grab the elastic that's in there, and I will pull this end into that channel so that that join part isn't going to show at all. And then I move that back down that way, take that guy off, and now it's done. Here is the scroll rod cover. You have one piece of elastic that is floating. It's not sewn to the fabric anywhere. And the good part about that is that if your elastic ever gets worn out, you can easily replace it without damaging the rest of the scroll rod cover. This photo is to show you that you should cut 2 pieces of fabric and 2 pieces of elastic to make 2 scroll rod covers, one for the bottom and one for the top of your frame. Alright, hey guys, here it is, the brand new scroll rod cover for my 12-inch Millennium frame, and I'll show you how I put it on. I go to one end, I expose the elastic, I get a finger in there so that it's free of the fabric, and I go to the other end and do the same thing so that I can stretch the elastic without the fabric being caught. And then what I do is I pinch this end so I can stretch this end out a little bit farther, and I get it right up and over onto the frame. Then I go to this end and I can stretch it and get it up onto the frame, and then I smooth out the fabric panel so that it's flat the way I like it. So there it is. Brand new scroll rod covers for my 12-inch Millennium. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to measure your frame, whatever brand style you have, for the size of fabric panel that you're going to need. So let me pull this off. Get my measuring tape. Alright, there's 2 things that we need to know is the length that you need your fabric panel to be. So you're going to measure from the widest that your fabric can be on the frame. And for the Millennium it is right here. So I measure across, and that is 12 inches. For the width of the fabric panel, what I do is I position my tape so that it extends 1/4 inch past the top edge of the scroll bar, because I determined that's my happy point. That's how far I want it to extend up. If it gets much longer than that, it tends to get in the way of stitching. So I get it there, I hold it in place, bring it around, and then I look. On this side, the top of the bar is at 3¼ inches. So add 1/4 inch to that, and I need my fabric panel to be 3½ inches wide. So now let's figure out how I need to cut my fabric. Let's zoom in a little bit so you can see this. Alright, so my desired length of my fabric panel needs to be 12 inches. My desired width for my fabric panel is 3½ inches. So what I need to figure to cut my fabric is my fabric length is my fabric panel length, 12 inches plus 1 inch. Gives me 13 inches. Fabric width is my fabric panel width, which is 3½ plus 2 inches, gives me 5½ inches. Now let me show you, if you're wondering, where I came up with the 1 and the 2 inch additions. I have a graphic here to show you. Get it in frame. So the shaded part is your fabric panel. If you're doing a 1/4 inch fold twice for this hem on the edge, that gives you a 1/2 inch of extra fabric on this side. So 1/2 inch here and 1/2 inch here is what I get my 1 inch. And then on the long sides you have a 1/4 inch and a 3/4 inch. So this is a full inch here and then a full inch here. That's where I get the 2 inches from. Now one thing that I want to show you, a tip. Let me grab my piece. When you're at the ironing board and you're turning these long edges, once you're done doing both sides, measure the width of your panel. If it's not what you want it to be, what you've determined is what you want it to be here, sorry, your fabric panel, this is what I want it to be. So if it is at 3½ inches, that's good. If it's not, I'm going to have to adjust. If the panel is wider than it needs to be, you make this turn more than 3/4 of an inch. So you pull it in to make it narrower. And you adjust that until you get your width to where you want it. If your piece is actually narrower than you want it to be, you can move this out a little bit, make it narrower until you get it where you want to be. The one limitation with that, let me grab a piece of elastic, is whatever elastic you're using, your channel has to be at least that wide. Because if it's narrower than your elastic, then your elastic's not, you're going to have a dickens of a time getting it to go through, and it's going to want to bind up all the time. So you need to have a little bit of wiggle room. So once you've got it to where you're satisfied, that's when you take it to the sewing machine and you sew your channels. Alright, so now that I've shown you how to measure your fabric, let's go to the elastic. Now the elastic was a bit trickier. Let me zoom out. I tried to figure out a proportional measurement for the elastic, and I tested it out on a few different size frames, and it just wasn't working. So I had to come up with a different way of figuring out the length for my elastic. And let me show you this is the elastic that I'm using. It is a 3/8 inch braided elastic made by Dritz. I prefer the braided over the knit because it just has a softer feel to it. Now the process I've come up with is good because not only does it solve the non-proportional issue I was having, but it also allows, if you're using a different width of elastic or different brand or a different type, the amount of stretch that elastic has is going to be different. So this allows for that difference. Alright, so what I do is I take the elastic still on the spool, you know, so you're not wasting a bunch, and I get it underneath my frame like so. This end I hold it close to the post, and this end I grab it and I pull it way out so that it's about as far as it'll go, and then I bring it around to meet up, and I grab it with this hand so that I can switch hands. So now I have the two ends with it stretched pretty close to its maximum range. I pull it as far as it'll go, and then I ease back just a little bit, and I grab both with my one hand, and I grab a little Sharpie and I make a little dot right there, right where this meets up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this and I'm going to do a dry fit test. So because, one note here is because my Millennium frame has a fairly low nub to get past, I don't have to cut too much of wiggle room extra. If you've got a big knob over here, or if your frame, this sticks out further, give yourself a little bit more wiggle room on the length of elastic that you cut. So there's my mark right there. I'm gonna give myself about 3 inches. Grab my scissors and I make a cut. So now what I do is I take this length, find my dot, and I line the end up with that dot. Take a safety pin and I get it to go through the elastic pretty close to the end there. Alright, so now this is what my guesstimate for the length of elastic that I need. Now I'm going to do the dry fit test. I take my elastic, put it around the one end, and then I pull it out. Now if you can see over here, I'm pulling it about as far as it'll go, and my knuckles are grazing that nub. So that tells me that I need to make the length of elastic a little bit longer. Ideally what you want is about 1 centimeter of clearance so that you're not scraping your knuckles on that edge just a little bit. If you're pulling out to here, then that's too much elastic. You need to shorten it a little bit. So you want to get it to right about there. So now what I'll do is I will make the adjustment. Take the safety pin out, I move it up about 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, and just guesstimate how far that needs to be. put the safety pin back in, and I try my dry fit again. Pull it as far as it'll go, and as you can see, I'm just barely, I'm rubbing as I go across. If that's good for you, go ahead, but I want just a little bit more clearance. So again, take the safety pin out, and I slide it just a smidgen further. Put the pin back in, and dry fit test number 3. So now I'm going to pull it, and look, I'm getting it right where I want it. It's just I'm not touching the nub as I go across, but it's not too far. So this is what I'm happy with. The length of elastic that is going to work for this frame. So I pull it off. Pull the safety pin out, and still holding it in place, I grab my Sharpie and I make a line right there. Alright, let me darken that line a little bit because my Sharpie was left out. So, alright, there we go. There's my line. As you can see, there's my starting dot. That was my guesstimate, and this is how much farther I needed to get to the perfect point. So now what I need to do is I'm going to measure 1 inch from this line and cut it off. So I'll get my measuring tape out, put it out. 0, mark my 1 inch spot, and trim. Alright, so now all I need to do is put the safety pin through that end, like so, and it is all ready for you to add it to the fabric panel. Now, one thing that I want to mention is actually 2 things. First thing is, what I would do is I would measure this length right here so that I can document it somewhere, whether it's in a notebook or on your Evernote or wherever you like to keep track of your cross-stitch type stuff. That way, if your elastic ever gets damaged or worn out or whatnot, you can easily replace it. You already know how long the length needs to be so that you don't have to do your dry fit test again. So you just cut that length of elastic, snip that one, take it out, add the new one in. So now the other thing that I want to mention is, let me grab my frame. Those of you that are using the dowel rod type frames, this right here is about as far as I would allow using that method. And it's up to you, whatever you're comfortable with, but keep in mind that the longer your frame is, the more floppy the center of the scroll cover gets, so more tension is needed to keep that taut. So if you have it sticking, way out here, there's one change that could be made to my design to help with that. Let me get my elastic and I'll show you. What I would do is I would cut this length a good ways longer than what I would need it. I would say about that much. And then I would feed them into one of these guys. the spring tension doggles. So let me get it fed in. Fold them up so they go in nicely. And in they go, and through they go. Alright. So what I would do is I would take this extra bit right here and trying to do this with it away from my body is a little difficult. I would do a knot and maybe do it twice or even 3 times. The goal is to get your knot big enough so that it won't pull back through the hole in the doggle. So let me get the other one done up. And another way, if you have enough extra to do this, another way to do it is to create your loop, put your tail through once, bring it around, put it through again, bring it around, put it through again, and then pull. And there you got a triple knot done up there. And then you can pull it to its maximum, and this would, you'd have quite a bit of extra room. This is a real non-proportional example here, but the extra that you'd have, extra length, would give you enough to get it up over that long dowel rod. And then once it's on, you grab your tail ends and you tighten it down. Now I don't know exactly how well this is going to hold a really taut piece of elastic, so if you make yours to go on a long dowel rod and it's not working for you, this tends to slip. I don't know if it will or not, but if it does, let me know. I have another idea on how to change the design of the scroll rod cover to accommodate a really long dowel rod. But if this works, then, you know, wonderful. If it doesn't, let me know, and I'll monkey around with my idea to see if I can produce a working prototype. Alright, so that's it. That's it. This is everything that I know to make a scroll rod cover. Alright guys, so what'd you think? Hopefully the video was easy to follow. I was a little worried it might seem a little disjointed, so let me know what you think, and if you have any questions, just let me know. Alright? Happy stitching!